You should really ask your husband where he was last Thursday night. That's what my mother said to me over coffee, her voice calm, almost sympathetic, like she was offering helpful advice instead of lighting a match in the middle of my marriage. I remember the exact moment because it felt like the air in the room suddenly shifted. One second we were sitting in her kitchen in Hartford, sunlight coming through the window, the smell of fresh coffee between us. The next second my chest felt tight, like someone had quietly replaced the oxygen with doubt. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it sounded ridiculous. My husband had spent Thursday night on the couch next to me, half watching a documentary and half asleep after a long shift at the architecture firm where he worked. "What are you talking about?" I asked. My mother tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when she believed she held a piece of information no one else had. It was a look I had seen my entire life. "Well," she said slowly, "I just thought you deserved to know. I heard from someone that he was seen with another woman. Another woman." The words dropped into the space between us like a stone in still water. I should explain something before I go further. My mother had always had a complicated relationship with the truth. Growing up, stories had a way of bending around her. Small details changed. Conversations she'd never had suddenly appeared in her version of events. Sometimes she exaggerated harmless things. Other times, the distortions were much bigger. But this was different. This wasn't a story about a neighbor or a distant relative. This was my husband, the man I had married 8 months earlier in a small ceremony outside Boston. The man who built bookshelves for our apartment with his own hands, because he knew I loved old novels. The man who woke up every Saturday morning and made pancakes, even though he was terrible at flipping them. The idea that he was secretly seeing someone else felt absurd. Still, doubt has a strange way of working. It doesn't arrive all at once. It starts small. A single question. Then another. "What did you hear exactly?" I asked carefully. My mother leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice even though no one else was in the house. "A friend of mine said he saw your husband downtown last week," she said. "He was having dinner with a woman. They looked close." Close. Another vague word that could mean anything or nothing. "What friend?" I asked. She waved her hand lightly. "Oh, you don't know him." That was the moment something inside me clicked into place, because my mother had used that exact phrase before. Usually right before a story began to unravel under even the smallest amount of scrutiny. But she kept going. "I'm just worried about you," she said softly. "You deserve someone loyal." It was such a carefully crafted sentence. Concern wrapped around accusation. Protection disguised as doubt. And the strangest part was that she wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was watching my reaction, studying it, almost like she was waiting for something. What she didn't know was that 3 days earlier, I had already purchased a birthday gift for her. A simple digital Dashcam. She had mentioned wanting one for months because of traffic incidents near her neighborhood. The camera was already installed in her car, and it had been recording every drive she took, including the drive she made last Thursday night. 3 days before that conversation in my mother's kitchen, I had been standing in the parking lot outside her house with a small black box in my hands. The Dashcam wasn't expensive, just a clean, reliable model with a wide-angle lens and automatic recording that started whenever the car engine turned on. I had ordered it online after she mentioned, more than once, that traffic around her neighborhood had become unpredictable. "Too many careless drivers," she had said during one of our Sunday phone calls. "I wish I had a camera in the car just in case." So I bought one, the kind that quietly records the road ahead and the interior audio inside the vehicle. It saves everything onto a memory card, unless you delete it. That afternoon, I had surprised her by installing it myself. She stood in the driveway watching while I adjusted the mount behind the rearview mirror. "You didn't have to do this," she said, though the smile on her face said otherwise. "It's easy," I told her. Now, if anything strange happens, you'll have a record of it. At the time, those words meant nothing more than a practical safety measure. But as I sat in her kitchen days later listening to her suggest my husband had been unfaithful, those same words echoed in my mind in a very different way. A record of it. I kept my expression calm while she spoke, stirring my coffee slowly as though I were simply processing the information she'd shared. Inside, though, something else was happening. Not anger. Not even disbelief. It was a quiet awareness forming in the background, the same instinct that had surfaced many times during my childhood whenever one of my mother's stories didn't quite align with reality. A small voice that said, "Pay attention." "So what are you going to do?" she asked gently. The concern in her tone sounded rehearsed. I set my spoon down. "Well," I said, "I'll talk to him." She nodded approvingly, like a teacher watching a student arrive at the expected conclusion. "That's good," she replied. "Just remember you deserve honesty." I finished my coffee and stayed a few more minutes, discussing ordinary things. Her garden, a new neighbor down the street, the weather forecast for the weekend. On the surface, nothing about the visit seemed unusual. But as I drove home to our apartment in Boston, my thoughts kept circling the same quiet detail. Last Thursday night. My husband had come home late that evening. Yes, but not suspiciously late. Just around 8 instead of his usual 6:30. He'd mentioned stopping by a hardware store to pick up a bracket for a shelf he was building. Then we'd ordered takeout and watched television. A perfectly normal night. Still, curiosity can grow even when you trust someone completely. By the time I reached our apartment building, I had already decided to ask him directly. He was in the living room when I walked in, sitting on the floor surrounded by pieces of wood and a measuring tape. "Hey," he said, smiling. "I'm finally finishing that bookshelf." I leaned against the doorframe and watched him for a moment. Then I asked the question. "Where were you last Thursday evening?" He didn't even hesitate. "Hardware store," he said immediately. "Why?" His expression was open, puzzled. So I told him, not dramatically, just the facts. "My mother says someone saw you having dinner with another woman downtown." He blinked once, then laughed softly in disbelief. "That's creative," he said. Then he stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, and pulled his phone from his pocket. "Actually," he said, scrolling through something, "you might want to see this." Because while my mother had been certain about her version of events, there was something she didn't realize had been recorded that same night. My husband placed his phone on the kitchen counter between us and turned the screen toward me. On it was a receipt. Not just any receipt. One of those automatic digital confirmations from a hardware store purchase. The timestamp read 6:42 p.m., last Thursday, and the location matched the store he always used 2 blocks from his office. He scrolled again. "Here," he said. This time it was a short security clip sent to employees through the store's app. Apparently the manager had shared it earlier that week in a staff message after someone knocked over a display of paint cans. In the background of the footage, near aisle 7, I could clearly see my husband pushing a cart with a box of shelf brackets. The timestamp read 6:38 p.m. I looked up at him. "Your mom thinks I had time to secretly meet someone for dinner after buying hardware?" he said with a small smile. "I wish my schedule was that exciting." The calm way he said it told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't angry. Mostly he looked confused, which meant something else was going on. I leaned back against the counter and folded my arms, thinking carefully about the conversation I'd had earlier that morning. My mother hadn't said she personally saw anything. She said a friend had. An unnamed friend. A familiar pattern. "What exactly did she tell you?" my husband asked. I repeated the story word for word. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Then either her friend is mistaken, or someone is creating a story. He didn't say the obvious third possibility out loud, but we both knew what it was. Silence settled in the kitchen for a moment. Then I remembered something. "Wait," I said quietly. He looked at me. 3 days ago, I installed that dashcam in her car. He frowned slightly. "The one you bought for her birthday?" I nodded. "It records whenever the engine starts." A slow realization crossed his face. "And she mentioned Thursday night," he said. "Yes. My mother lived about 20 minutes from downtown Hartford. If she had driven anywhere that evening, especially to meet the mysterious friend who supposedly saw my husband, there was a good chance the camera had captured something. Not speculation, not secondhand stories, actual footage. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then my husband gave a small shrug. "Well," he said, "that seems like a useful birthday gift." Despite the tension in the room, I laughed quietly, because the situation had shifted in a way I hadn't expected. When my mother told her story that morning, she had sounded confident, calm, almost certain that I would accept the information exactly the way she presented it. But she had forgotten something important. Technology doesn't rely on memory. It doesn't reshape events to fit a narrative. It simply records what happens. Later that evening after dinner, I sent my mother a message. Just something simple. "Did you drive anywhere Thursday night? I want to make sure the dashcam is working properly." Her reply came about 10 minutes later. "Yes, I went out for a bit. Why?" I stared at the screen for a moment, because suddenly I wasn't just curious anymore. Now I wanted to know exactly where she had gone, and more importantly, who she had been talking to inside that car. Because if my instincts were right, the dashcam footage and the birthday gift I'd given her was about to reveal something she never expected anyone to hear. The next morning, I drove back to my mother's house with a small laptop in my bag and the calmest expression I could manage. On the outside, it looked like a routine visit. Inside, I carried a quiet certainty that the truth was sitting somewhere on a tiny memory card mounted behind her rearview mirror. She greeted me at the door with the same warm smile she always used. "Back so soon," she said lightly. "I just want to check the dashcam," I replied. "Make sure everything's recording properly." She stepped aside and let me in without hesitation. That told me one of two things. Either nothing unusual had happened, or she had completely forgotten the camera existed. Her car sat in the driveway exactly where it had been the day before. I opened the passenger door, reached up behind the mirror, and removed the small memory card while she stood nearby watching. "Technology always confuses me," she said with a small laugh. "Good thing you understand these things." I smiled politely. "Let's take a look." We went inside and sat at the kitchen table. I inserted the card into my laptop and opened the video files. The screen filled with a list of timestamps, each one representing a recorded drive. Thursday evening. There it was. 7:12 p.m. My mother leaned forward slightly while I clicked the file open. At first, the footage looked ordinary. The camera showed the front windshield, the quiet neighborhood streets passing by as she drove. The sky was already dark, streetlights reflecting across the glass. Then, after a few minutes, something else appeared. Audio. Her voice. I hadn't even realized the dashcam recorded interior sound until that moment. On the video, my mother pulled up to a red light. Her phone was connected through the car's speaker system, which meant every word was perfectly clear. "Well," she said, "I told her this morning." There was a pause. A man's voice responded faintly through the speaker. "Do you think she believed it?" My mother sighed softly. "I don't know yet," she replied. "But if she starts questioning him, it'll create enough doubt." The room around us went completely still. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the screen. The man on the phone spoke again. You really think breaking them up is a good idea? My mother's answer came without hesitation. That marriage is a mistake, she said. She married too quickly, and he's already influencing her too much. My fingers froze on the keyboard. Influencing me. The word echoed in my mind while the video continued playing. On the recording, my mother turned the steering wheel and pulled into a parking lot somewhere downtown. I just need her to start seeing him differently, she continued calmly. Once the trust cracks, the rest will follow. Another pause. Then the man asked quietly, "What if it backfires?" She laughed. "It won't. She's always trusted me." The video kept running for another 30 seconds before the call ended. I finally lifted my eyes from the laptop screen. Across the kitchen table, my mother was sitting completely still. Her confident expression from earlier that morning had disappeared. In its place was something else. The look of someone realizing a story had just collided with undeniable evidence. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I closed the laptop gently and slid it across the table toward her, because the Dashcam she thought was just a thoughtful birthday gift had captured something far more valuable. The truth about a lie she never expected anyone to hear. For a long moment, the kitchen stayed completely silent. My mother stared at the closed laptop sitting between us like it was something fragile that might break if she touched it. The confident composure she usually carried had faded, replaced by a tight stillness in her shoulders. "You recorded me?" she finally said. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I shook my head calmly. "No," I replied. "The Dashcam recorded what happened in the car." The difference mattered. Technology had simply done what it was designed to do: capture reality without choosing sides. She looked down at the table. "I didn't think the camera had audio," she murmured. That single sentence confirmed everything. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't misunderstanding. She knew exactly what she had done. I leaned back slightly in my chair, keeping my voice steady. "Why?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Outside, a car passed down the street, the faint sound of tires rolling over pavement drifting through the window. It felt strange how normal the world looked while something inside this kitchen had shifted so dramatically. Finally, she exhaled. "I was trying to protect you," she said. The explanation sounded rehearsed, like something she had told herself many times before. "From what?" I asked. She hesitated. "From making the wrong choice." I studied her face, realizing something that had probably been true for years, without me fully acknowledging it. My mother didn't see my life as something separate from hers. In her mind, she was still the one shaping the direction, still the one deciding what was best. But that wasn't how adulthood worked. And it definitely wasn't how marriage worked. "You tried to damage my relationship," I said quietly. "You wanted me to doubt him." Her eyes flickered toward the laptop again. I didn't think it would go this far. But the recording had already proven otherwise. She hadn't just mentioned a rumor. She had planned the doubt. Carefully. Intentionally. I stood up and closed the distance between the table and the door, picking up my laptop bag as I did. "I trusted you," I said. She looked up quickly. "And I still want to," I continued. "But trust can't exist if stories replace the truth." For the first time since the conversation started, she didn't try to argue. She just sat there quietly. Maybe she realized that the situation had moved beyond explanations. Maybe she simply didn't know what to say. Either way, I walked toward the door knowing something important had changed. Not just between us, but inside me as well. Later that evening, when I told my husband everything that had happened, he listened carefully before giving a small nod. "So what happens now?" he asked. I thought about the footage, the conversation in the car, and the moment in the kitchen when the truth finally surfaced. "Now," I said, "we move forward without lies." And sometimes the strongest way to protect a relationship isn't by fighting louder or proving someone wrong. Sometimes it's by letting the truth speak clearly enough that no one can rewrite it. If stories like this remind you how powerful honesty can be, feel free to support the channel so more people can hear them. Sharing the video or subscribing to Silent Revenge Lab helps.